I always try to be positive. I'm one of those people who says, I won't make a negative video just for the clicks. I'll always try to find the positives in any experience. But Bob Dylan owes me money. My name is Mark, and this is my music rundown. A couple of months ago, I was wondering, mostly to myself, why does the Blue Gate Theater in Shipshewana have 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 shows in a week, week in and week out, and our really local theater, the Morris Performing Arts Center, seems to do only 4 or 5 Broadway shows a year and just a small handful of concerts? First, the partial answer is they do much more than my tunnel vision hampered interests could see. I was doing one of my weekly venue sweeps looking for new concert info at the many venues I keep my eye on when out of nowhere an email pops up from the Morris. At first glance, I saw the name Bob Dylan in the subject line, and I figured the name in bold and the phrase tribute band or something like that would be down in the fine print. I mean, I did once see a theater, not the Morris, extensively advertise Phil Collins coming to town, and the marketing person that designed all that forgot to include the word experience on the ad. Yeah, that was not a good conversation. But no, the Bob Dylan was going to play at our Morris Center in South Bend. The ticket sale was a challenge. The amount of traffic being what I would guess was extremely high for these seats. Instantly, the seats in the first 2 rows were grayed out, not available. In a panic, I managed to snag seats in the 3rd row. Those tickets were like $159 or $169-ish a ticket. As I commonly do, I watched the sale for another maybe 15 or 20 minutes. The cheaper seats towards the back and up in the balcony were selling briskly. Then, about 20 minutes into the sale, the 1st and 2nd row seats became available. Now, I don't know if these were just turned on late or placed into pending status as soon as the sale started. My gut is telling me they were turned on late. I ended up buying 2 more tickets, this time in the front row, and these tickets were at a cost of $700 a ticket. Now, I expect to pay more to sit in the front row at a concert. The chance for a high five or a fist bump has some value. The chance to bring an item and a pen and maybe get it signed, album, cassette tape, something, worth a few extra bucks to get that opportunity. A lot of that depends on the setup for sure. I've been to shows where there's a 10-foot no man's land and a steel barricade between the stage and the rows of seats. And I've been to shows where I'm resting my elbows on the stage as I sit in my seat. The pit seats at the Morris, the 1st row is right up on the stage. So before we go any further here, I should come clean. I'm not really a huge Bob Dylan fan. I don't think I've ever owned a Bob Dylan record, and none of his songs would make it to my playlist. But I do recognize that he is probably one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and to see him in person is a bucket list type of event. In fact, most of his songs that have been hits have been songs that were covered by somebody else, and that cover version was a bigger hit than Bob's original version. My first indication this would be a letdown was after I bought the tickets, I see a notice that all phones would be locked into a Yonder bag. This is a pouch that locks your phone inside magnetically and will not open without the special unlocking key. My first assumption was it would be like a Faraday bag that would block the signal, not to be able to receive calls and texts. Turns out that wasn't the case. It was just a cloth bag that prevented you from using your phone. You could still feel it buzz when you got a text message or continue buzz if you got a phone call. They did make sure to tell everybody to be sure to put your phone on silent and turn the volume down before you put it in the bag. Now, they didn't actually search people. A few folks that were coming through had said that they left their phones in the car and they were allowed to enter without further challenge. So it would have been pretty easy to sneak a phone in. They were very clear that if they caught you taking a photo or whatever during the performance, that you would be kicked out of the theater. Before we go too far into the experience, I should mention the other thing that I thought was weird. When I bought the tickets, the only method of delivery that was available was pickup at will call. Now, we happened to be at this theater for a Broadway show a couple of weeks before the Dylan show, and I stopped at the ticket office to ask if I could pick up my tickets for the Bob Dylan show. After a few minutes of confusion in the ticket office, I was finally told that all of the seats in the first 10 rows could not be picked up until the day of the show, and they wouldn't be there until like an hour before the show time. When I asked for the reason, they said that's what Bob Dylan and the promoter wants. I guess by forcing paper tickets, not allowing the digital tickets or whatever, and not letting me get them until the day of the show, that prevents me from reselling them. Back to the Yonder bags, though. It was weird. Before the show, feeling my phone buzz and not being able to check the messages. I can think of a dozen or so emergency scenarios where not being able to get to my phone could be an issue. Yes, these are all things that we managed to get through mostly fine before we had cell phones, but we're not in the 80s anymore, and cell phones are a part of our everyday life. Something as simple as checking to see what time it is. Nope. I feel bad for the lady close to us who was actually wearing a watch. I never had to ask what time it was because enough other folks asked her that I just had to listen for the answer. When we got to our seats, I was immediately disappointed. The first thing, the orientation of the piano was such as that it would be directly between us and where Bob would sit to play the piano. The next thing I notice is all the stage monitors that allow the bands to hear what's going on, and the front line mics, they were all set up a good 20 feet back from the front of the stage. I mean, everything was really far back. I knew right then that we were going to be disappointed. There wasn't going to be any fist bumps or not a chance for a handshake. The lights go out. I see some figures walking out to the stage in the darkness. The lights come up. Bob Dylan is already seated at the piano. I can see the top of his head and some hair. Great. They start playing. Every song seemed to start the same way. It was kind of weird. It was like the musicians were all tuning their instruments without muting them, and then that ruckus would kind of blend into the song. It was really quite weird. It was finally during song 3 or 4 that Bob Dylan stood up and performed the entire song standing. At least this time, I could see his face. He would go up and down several more times throughout the show. The set list was also a little bit weird. Honestly, I didn't really recognize any of the songs. Some of his biggest hits were not there. I guess when you write as many songs as he has, it might be tough to cut the list to 17 or 18. I also heard some discussion from folks who are far more, better fans than I am, that these days he plays what he wants to play. I did recognize the lyrics to one tune. It's called That Ain't Me, Babe, only because in the movie Blow with Johnny Depp, there's a scene where Johnny Depp is in court, and when the judge asks him if he wants to make a statement, he quotes some of the lyrics from this song, and the judge in turn smacks him down for quoting Dylan. It was kind of comical. I also asked a neighboring fan if the piano sounded a little bit out of tune, and he said that's just how Bob Dylan plays. He is 83, so I can forgive this off-key playing, as he was actually playing and singing live, and I think live and a bit off is better than faking it with a backing track for sure. When the set was over, Bob and the band stood up in a line well behind this piano and just kind of stood there while the audience applauded. No waving, no bowing, no head nod, nothing. They just kind of stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and then they turned and walked off the stage. The lights remained off, and many fans kind of assumed that they would come back for an encore. But after an awkwardly long darkness, I would say, maybe a minute, two at the most, the house lights came on, and that was it. People started to head for the door. We stayed in our seats for a few moments, for the treasure hunt, hoping for a set list or some other souvenir. There was a guy a few seats away from us who had kind of a fisherman's cap he was wearing with guitar picks. Looked like they were sewn in all around it. It looked like fish scales. If I had to guess, I might say he had maybe 100 or more picks onto this hat. I thought, what a cool idea that is. I meant to ask him about it. I would certainly have taken a photo, but the yonder bag, I can't use my phone. At the end of the show, he stood there and held up a laminated sign that was very well done. It was not just a scribble on a piece of paper. The sign said, "Guitar pick, please." He was quiet. He didn't hound anybody. One of the roadies came close to him, and I did hear him say that they couldn't give him anything. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I'm guessing it was more Bob rules. I understand the desire to break down and load everything out, to get back on the road as soon as possible. These guys, they were kind of rude. A few people came up to the stage, and when they tried to get a roadie's attention, the roadies would just say no without even looking. It was like, come on. The crew was a mix of what I think were Dylan's own people and the local union guys. And I don't really know for sure which group was sharp. It could have been one or the other, or it could have been both. But I was thinking, man, these fans spent a shitload of money to get the experience they want. And I acknowledge the artist certainly has the right to determine what level of experience they offer. But they didn't have to just bark no at people. It's kind of like they were annoyed that people are fans of Bob Dylan and came to the show. I'm just saying there might have been a better way to say no. Another thing that really kind of just pressed my button a little bit was for some of the show, the bass player played, I'm not sure what you call it, but it's the big acoustic, like stand-up bass that they have to hold up and pluck with their hand. With about 4 songs to go, a roadie came out and started tinkering with this big-ass bass, while the bass player played a electric bass. And I thought there must be something wrong that needed attention, and the roadie was out there fixing it. No. He was disconnecting it and then took it off stage while they were still playing. Literally removing the instrument from the stage while the band was still playing. A couple of years ago, Bob Dylan sold his publishing rights, something like 300 or 400 million bucks. He has a net worth of about $500 million, so obviously he doesn't need the money. The reason he still tours at 83 is probably some combination of it keeps him young at heart, and he just enjoys playing his music, and I'm okay with both of those. I wanted to see Bob Dylan in person, as he is probably, maybe, the greatest songwriter of all time. I did that. I've seen him in person. I would probably not go again, and if I did go, it would definitely only be to go as like a group with a bunch of family that were going and asked me if I wanted to go, and it would for sure be the cheap seats. Now, I've spent some stupid money for front row seats at some shows. This is the only show that I really felt I was taken advantage of. $700 for the front row versus $160 for the third row. Anyway, my name is Mark. This has been my music rundown.
Another piece of bacon, baby.